Hey everyone, welcome back. We were just off the air for about, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds, trying to keep it nice and quick. But the show goes on with more voice of the customer sessions here at AWS On Air for reInvent 2020. As you can see on screen, hi, my name is Nick Walsh from AWS, still the same name, still the same face. But right now, I am joined by Heather Nolis, Senior Machine Learning Engineer from T-Mobile, and we are going to have a very exciting conversation about, surprise, machine learning and AI. It's a recurring trend. It's something that I love to talk about at reInvent every year. But most importantly, I'm excited to hear Heather and T-Mobile's story. Before we get into it, Heather, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think I have the coolest job at T-Mobile and I can talk about it pretty much forever. So
Well, forever would certainly be great. I know I would be interested, but production will yank us off stage at some point. So we'll try to make the most of the time that we have. So we just talked in the prior session about a journey to migrating to the cloud for analytics and AI ML, but really sort of being boots on the ground with a experimental AI and machine learning pipeline at a company of any size is certainly an interesting challenge. What was the way that T-Mobile approached AI and machine learning for their business? And was there a particular business objective that you worked backwards from with these experiments?
yeah, so it's really interesting the way that our team got started. We have like an internal Shark Tank, and so we pitched the idea of an AI team and this internal Shark Tank, and we won funding to basically try something out for 3 months. So we had 3 months to pump out a use case and prove that it was really beneficial to T-Mobile to have AI. And our very first use case was I was on a team that built all the plumbing that allows call center experts to chat with our customers. So if somebody comes into Twitter or Facebook or the app and they want to have a conversation with T-Mobile, we built all of that plumbing. So we also owned that entire all the transcripts and the text that was flowing back and forth between our care experts and our customers. And we said we're sitting on all of this beautiful data set of every problem that everybody in our entire organization is having, all of our customers are having. How can we use AI to help our experts solve their problem faster? So our very first use case was just whenever you send a message to T-Mobile, you're put in a queue just like if you call and then an expert will be with you in a few minutes. So we said, what can we do with those few minutes that we have? What analytics could we do? What information could we go out and grab and pull into the conversation to help the expert who ends up with that conversation be able to solve the problem more quickly? And to do that, we had to label these conversations because they aren't classified into what the different troubleshooting topics that we had. And so that was the hands down the most daunting part of getting started, was realizing like, yes, we have the data, but it's not labeled. It's not in a way that a machine can understand it. And we have to generate that ideal data set first.
So much excitement to talk about here. First, love the sort of internal innovation, the culture of innovation there. We Andy talked about that in the opening keynote, but just really being able to see this culture of, hey, everyone should be able to throw out ideas, and if there's a way to provide value to the business and to your customers that can get funding, that's always great to see. The other thing is, hearing the story of like, hey, we have data, it exists at our organization, and there's just value locked inside of it, right? In another way, you also have this experience that you can be laser focused on improving. Customers are on the line for a few minutes. How can we make their lives even better? Um, uh, we'll get into exactly what the solution looked like and the shape of that, but something that's becoming increasingly apparent to me as we talk here is, you said you have all this data but you need it to be labeled, and for machine learning, labeling data is certainly a difficult problem. We have a pointed service that I think you might be particularly familiar with. Is that the case? I'm fairly certain you and T-Mobile were part of the launch there. Do you want to
Yeah.
sort of give the punchline here?
Yeah, so it was really interesting because my organization really wanted me to connect with AWS to say how could we leverage anything here. But I'm pretty good at building models. That's my whole job. So the modeling side of things, I didn't necessarily need help on. But in talking to AWS, I was like, if I can be incredibly honest with you, my problem is not that I don't have data; it's that I have all of this data and it's just not categorized. And they were like, okay, well, we can let you in on a private beta for a project that ended up being called Ground Truth, which is AWS's internal labeling system, both a GUI and kind of like apply smart labels in the back end. And so we were, I think, one of the very first customers to start using it even in beta, and we still use it to this day. I was logged into Ground Truth earlier today, actually. So
Awesome. Yeah. Again, always great to see this, on our side at least, deeply interacting with customers and understanding not just, hey, do you like, X service, but what are your broader challenges in your day to day work? And for anyone that's worked with machine learning before, labeling data sets or just working with data, I usually always used to say wrangling data, but now we have a service called Data Wrangler, so I'm gonna have to be more picky with how I choose my words. But you survey data scientists and machine learning practitioners and engineers, and they spend far more time working with data than they would like because they'd rather be spending time doing what earns the company or delivers value, right? Which is actually building and tuning and deploying models and features. So,
Well, also, like,
also
labeling's like the least exciting piece, right? Like people want to know about what your cool model is doing, but like I can only build a cool model if I have really incredible data underneath it and lots of it. So
Exactly. So, we dipped our toes a little bit there in mentioning SageMaker Ground Truth to help label and create these data sets that are ready for machine learning use. But once you have that labeled data, what does it look like? What did either the early stage machine learning pipelines, or we could talk about what that looks like today? What does that architecture look like for machine learning at T-Mobile?
yeah, so we have two different major queues that are used. So one of the systems that we have basically listens to our Kafka screams in real time, and if there is something that the confidence is low or it's lower than we would expect below a given threshold, we use A2I to actually pipe that into ground truth and have a labeling job that helps us get better at the edges where our model isn't very certain. It also performs like a regular model audit. So that's how we're getting any accuracy values that we have is by just saying send 0.11% of all conversations to a human and get that done. And so that's all done in real time seamlessly with our Kafka streams. But then once we have all that data, it's like, oh, what do we do with it? We also use SageMaker for our training jobs. So our original models that we were releasing, we do pretty much exclusively deep learning, not exclusively, but it's my very favorite. And so we have a lot of these deep learning models that would take 10 or so hours to train on my local machine. And we have a system now where I can we have an architecture that's well established. I can commit my code to GitHub, it encrypts it, and then it sends it up to AWS, runs it on SageMaker, and then I can download my models. This is incredibly cool because now it takes longer to download my models than it does to train them. So that's no longer my rate limiting step. So I was able to go from doing one major experiment a day because it took so long to train my models to doing hundreds if I could write fast enough, we can now keep up on the training side. So that's another way we use SageMaker.
So much I feel like I say this after everything you say, but there's just so much value in such a short statements. I'm trying to envision the architecture diagram in my head here, and I'm hearing SageMaker Ground Truth to help
Mhm.
speed up the curation and the labeling of your trough of data that you
Yeah.
have. Then you have Kafka streams for ingesting this data in real time, and then well, we'll leave the real time aspect to the side for just a second, but training models with SageMaker helps in a lot of ways. First, I'm assuming it empowers you to not have to worry about the infrastructure tearing down and racking up a huge bill, right? You
Right.
execute your training, SageMaker spins up the cluster, performs the training, outputs the model to S3, and then you're all good.
Yep.
Um, and then I'm hearing a lot of mature feature sets in this pipeline here on the tail end when you're performing inference. So again, ingesting events through Kafka streams, but then I'm seeing both the use of A2I, and we'll unpack that for just a
Yeah.
second. A2I, Amazon Augmented AI, enables you to easily implement human in the loop for your machine learning inference. So,
Also,
uh,
like emphasis on easily. It's the most easily integratable service I've ever worked with. So
that is high praise. I will certainly let the team know. But if you're looking to get what I'm about to talk about into production, A2I is your one-stop shop. Essentially, when you deploy a machine learning model, especially in the beginning, you may want to deeply understand or have certain thresholds for which inferences will be executed by the model, or when they will be passed to a human reviewer to also review. And this sort of the prior conversation was always like either humans review everything or it's entirely automated. And the question everyone sort of asked was, why not both, right? What if we can take that confidence value, like you described, and at a certain threshold, pass only those requests to a human reviewer? And that's what A2I does. So, really excited to see you using that in production. Um, and there was something else that you had referenced. I'm blanking on it as well. It wasn't A2I, it was something that you mentioned immediately after that.
We mostly use A2I Ground Truth and just SageMaker for training. So we have
Okay.
like it connected to our Git pipeline, and that's how our training jobs actually occur.
Awesome. Yeah, and sort of end to end here, the other nice thing is no need to have any machine learning infrastructure, right? You can author code on your local device, and you're not ever running your machine learning training there, right?
Yes.
Whether you are invoking the SageMaker APIs locally to perform the training, or what it sounds like is you author your code and your scripts for training, and then you push those to a Git repo that will kick off the training job that runs entirely on the cloud and is orchestrated from the cloud. Means you can really train your models from anywhere.
Well, and especially with working remotely, if I'm having to do deep learning training jobs on my machine, I can't do a video call. So like it's essential to offload that to the cloud. My computer can only handle so much at once.
Yeah, and when talking about the speed up, I think sometimes the magic comes into the nuts and bolts of it, right? And that's in with SageMaker, you pay for the compute time that's used, and what we find with machine learning is that with linear scaling, oftentimes in a lot of these algorithms, why pay for one machine to run for 10 hours when you can pay 10 machines to run for 1 hour, or go a little more extreme and up the cluster size as long as the scaling works in your favor, and you can have these models trained for the same cost in a fraction of the time, which at the end of the day really means that you can go from performing one experiment a day to the bottleneck being as fast as you can sling code, which is certainly the space I think we would all like to be in with the bottlenecks for delivering features.
Right. Yeah. And that's what it was. It's sometimes hard to get those things prioritized with a product person because they're like, can't you just train it on your local machine? But being able to come back and be like, this will give me a literal 100 times speed up in what I can do in a day. Very powerful argument.
Certainly so. Now, we have. I'm sure you've learned so many things along the way. That architecture certainly didn't spawn itself overnight. Were there any particular key learnings or challenges along the way? Even getting to use ground truth, I'd imagine, and labeling your data set was probably your biggest blocker initially. But has your bottleneck changed over time? Were there any lessons that you'd like to impart that other people can learn from?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think it's a feature of ground truth that I don't think is talked about enough. That to me it's so cool that we do something on top of what already exists, which is ground truth while you're labeling will in the background be training a model to apply labels as well. The idea being that not every piece of data is worthy of seeing human eyes. If I've labeled hi as a greeting one time, I shouldn't have to label hi, hi there, hello, etc. So if it can take any of those things and apply a pre-label, that's incredibly useful. And we actually found that sometimes AWS's labeling algorithm is more conservative than we want to be. Like we're a little bit more fast and free. So we will download intermediary data sets from ground truth, train our own pre-labeling algorithms that are a little more aggressive, and then push it forward. So I think that's really like the main thing I've learned in all of this is in the beginning, I was really scared of computer generated labels. And now I think that they're the best thing ever. They can reduce 20% of our total labels that we have to create. And then the other part is I think that there's a hesitancy when you go to ground truth to say, if I've been doing my labeling in Excel, how is this any different? Like it's still clicking, it's still looking at a GUI. But what we found is that by just moving from doing labeling in Excel to doing it in the default ground truth GUI, we had a 3.7 times increase in the labels that we could generate. And the labels are very expensive. That's a very expensive part of machine learning. So there's a tendency to say, oh, but this might be some work to set up. And it's like, but the amount of speed you can obtain just from using ground truth. So that's a 3.7 times increase from just the cost to labels. And then there's also the auto labeling piece that's taking some out of the bucket as well. Like you can get so much more labels per dollar by just making some really smart choices. And so that's, I guess, my biggest takeaway.
Yeah, and diving a little deeper on exactly how that feature works for because again, we've spoken about a bunch of services at this point, and even Ground Truth has so many facets to why it's amazing. When you use SageMaker Ground Truth, and you have, let's say, 100,000 images, and we'll talk about in a second exactly data size to start getting reasonable results. But say you have 100,000 images, traditionally you would need to have whatever the time it takes to label one image, multiply that by 100,000, and that's how long it's going to take to get a labeled data set. But with ground truth, this auto labeling feature, actually involves a model that ground truth trains sort of behind the scenes that can help you have a guess at what the label will be for us for the images or the items in your data set after a certain number. So let's say after about 2,000 images, you can then have a pre-populated guess at that, such that you can reduce the time that the labeler needs to spend on each image, thus cutting the cost down. And at a certain threshold, that auto model can become so confident that you can oftentimes trust it to actually label those images. You mentioned that in certain scenarios it was more conservative than even some of your own labelers. So very exciting stuff there. So let's tie this back together to the opening here, which was this big business opportunity to deliver a better experience for T-Mobile's customers. You've run these machine learning experiments. You clearly have a mature pipeline in production now. What was this able to deliver in terms of end user features or experiences?
Yeah, so we launched this product the same time that T-Mobile launched this concept called Team of Experts, meaning that every time that you call T-Mobile, you'll be directed to the same group of like 20 to 30 people who specialize in your specific location and who can provide you like highly, highly personalized information and troubleshooting. And with that, my favorite statistic that came is that there was a 50% reduction in agent attrition. Our call center experts are leaving less because we were able to build this AI architecture that helps them do their job better and take some of the easy things out. But we also had like a 60% increase in NPS whenever we rolled this out. So it's like our customers are also getting better service when they do it. And we also saw the overall calls per account go down and the amount of time that people had to call back in multiple times for an issue by about 40%. So my goal of are we building AI technology that sits in front of the expert that can solve somebody's problem better than a human brain by using like AI and people together, like I feel like it's a yes. So that's obviously successful. And then from our initial POC, we were a team of 3 that did that. Now we're a fully fledged multi-stack. Like we have 4 different technical teams underneath us, building a ton of different AI products. So this was so successful, it spawned into like an entire organization basically that's running AI for T-Mobile now.
Wow, that's fantastic. To be able to see sort of from ideation, like, hey, we have a bunch of data, let's make use of it, to growing the number of teams that exist at the company. But talking about how you understand whether this was successful, I mean, what more could you want, right? You have the initial variables that you hypothesized against. You have, these objective measures that are things you wanted to reduce, things like return calls, if assuming a problem wasn't resolved, time spent sort of in the queue or time to resolution. But then I would say best of all is just hearing it from your customers' mouths, right? You mentioned like NPS, I think Net Promoter Score. That's quite literally like how satisfied are you as a customer, and if nothing else, being able to know directly that your customers are more satisfied with the service they're receiving is probably one of the most fulfilling pieces of feedback of all. So really end to end measuring everything and seeing green lights all across the board.
Exactly. Yeah. And well, so there we did see there was one metric that's really interesting. We saw the time spent on the phone go up, but we think that's because our solves are more accurate now. So like even if it takes longer to be on the phone in one call and you don't have to call back 3 times, feels like a win. So yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that opens a broader conversation around chasing the wrong metrics sometimes, right? If you're
Yeah.
simply optimizing for quickest call time, that doesn't necessarily mean that leads to the best outcomes. In a sense, maybe a cautionary tale for folks that are trying to look into this. It's not just about getting the lowest or the highest number for certain factors, but really trying to deeply understand what is the problem you're solving. And in your case, it's again solving customers' problems through these request or support queries. So really, really interesting stuff. And you mentioned that this has been so successful that T-Mobile is investing more, growing a large number of teams to solve more of these problems and challenges with machine learning. I almost feel silly asking this, but like what is next that you can talk about other than deeper investment and more of what you've seen already?
We have, so I mentioned this exists in the messaging space. We're lifting and shifting it to calls as well. So how can we transcribe all of our calls in real time and have that exact same functionality? We have a trial for that that's currently out with I think 40 agents, and so hopefully that will be expanded in Q1 of next year. And then we also have a few chatbot projects because some customers we're learning don't want to talk to a person. That like that's a really annoying thing to have to do. They actually want to come in, chat with a bot, set up like pay their bill and never have to interact with somebody. So we call it self-service for those who want it. And so that's my main focus right now is actually on this robust chatbot product. How can we take the calls that our experts don't want to take or that are really rote and repetitive and get those people service in the way that they want it, which sometimes is not with a person.
Wonderful. We talk a lot at AWS, and we heard a lot in the keynotes about meeting the customer and our customers, which are developers, where they are in however they author code and deploy and manage systems. But being able to have these services allow T-Mobile to deliver features and serve your customers in the way that they want to be served is certainly a great story to hear. So we're unfortunately at about time. I've loved this conversation. I could geek out just over ground truth alone until the end of time. But unfortunately, we have to sign off. We have some other sessions coming up after this. But again, joining me today, Heather Nolis, Senior Machine Learning Engineer over at T-Mobile. Heather, thank you so much. This was
Thank
really
you.
an amazing conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
Awesome. Well, that is going to wrap up for Voice of the Customer right this moment. We have some more content coming up. We'll have a link to the schedule in chat if you're following along on Twitch. But otherwise, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you in a little bit. Thanks again.